Okay. So we're live now. Everybody, welcome back. This is your host, Marv. Welcome to your Verano 1711 podcast. Today we have a big name. I mean, it's a special scholar. I just said that to him off camera. Of course, with us, it's here, Professor Dr. Matthew Novenson from Princeton Theological Seminary. Dr. Novenson, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Glad to be talking with you, Marv. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. We're good. Dr. Novenson, with your permission, I'm going to say this in my original language, which is Spanish.
Yep.
For every Spanish person who is willing to check this interview out. So, gente, de nuevo, ¿verdad? Tenemos aquí al doctor Novenson. Un placer enorme tenerlo. Él es profesor ahorita de la facultad en el Princeton Theological Seminary. Así que hoy vamos a estar hablando sobre Cristología y monoteísmo en la cultura greco-romana. So I just gave the intro right there, and right now we're gonna move on to the main intro right away. Let's do it. All right, people. Again, welcome back, everybody. Just paying attention to this interview because we're going to be talking about a very, I was saying to Dr. Novenson off camera that this is one topic close to my heart. All that has to do with Christological and monotheism is a big deal for me. And he has edited a volume on this very subject matter. With some other high-profile scholars, tackling the subject in its original context, in the Greco-Roman context, to be more specific. So today we're going to be throwing those questions at Dr. Novenson, and he's ready to go and answer those for us. So before we can move on, I just want to give a brief intro here. Dr. Novenson, he is Helen H.P. Manson Professor of New Testament at Princeton Theological Seminary. How about that? He's also an honorary fellow in the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. If you want to go and study there, do it. Don't miss a chance. Where previously he held the chair of biblical criticism and biblical antiquities. His monographs include Christ Among the Messiahs. Yeah, that was published with Oxford University Press 2012. And also The Grammar of Messianism, again with Oxford University Press in 2017. And moving forward, Paul, then and now with Ehrman's 2022, Paul in Judaism, which is, Dr. Novenson, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is your most recent book, right? Paul in Judaism at the End of History. Okay. Yeah. And this one was published with Cambridge University Press 2024. His edited volumes include Monotheism and Christology in Greco-Roman Antiquity with Braille 2020, which is the book that we're going to be talking today. Finally, last but not least, he also the prestigious, I can say it that way, the prestigious Oxford Handbook of Pauline Studies with Oxford 2022. He is founder and co-editor of the book series Edinburgh Studies of Religion and Antiquity, Edinburgh University Press, and associate editor of the journal New Testament Studies. By the way, Dr. Novin, so I need to ask you, that Edinburgh studies, there are pretty good topics coming from that press. I mean, I have about both of them right now, but when that happened, if you can tell us just a little bit about that, the founding of this Edinburgh press, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's a very cool series. If any of you are working on monographs on a sort of on religion and antiquity, Judaism,
Yeah.
Christianity, Greco-Roman religions, we've got a lot of cool books coming out. We've recently had titles by uh, Stanley Stowers and Elena
Yes.
Dugan and Megan Nutzman, and we've got one by David Frankfurter coming out soon. That'll be really interesting. Anyway,
Yes.
so keep us in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, please, definitely, definitely. I'm going to grab some picture from Amazon here, so people who doesn't know what that is, they will know. Definitely.
That's great.
So we want to value Dr. Novinson's time. So I'm going to throw the first question, Dr. Novinson, right now here, and it goes like this. So, why has the term monotheism become so controversial in modern scholarship? Is there anything either historical or theological at stake here? Please let us know about that.
Yeah, very good question. It is indeed controversial, and probably because there's a lot, both historical and theological at stake for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think when the term is a modern term, monotheism. It comes from the mid 17th century.
Yeah.
Was coined by Henry Moore, a Cambridge philosopher. Um,
Platonist. Yeah.
and it was already at that time a kind of polemical term. So he was using it polemically to contrast, uh, people he called heathens, polytheists,
Yeah.
from um, from what he was positing as monotheism, people who didn't believe in a plurality of divine beings. So it was always a polemical term, like meant to draw boundaries and exclude uh, and even you know uh, even communicate some scorn and contempt maybe for other people. So right, because of
Yeah.
that, uh, that aspect of the word is still with us. It's a boundary defining word. It matters for a lot of religious people's identity, right? I mean, nowadays, Jews and Muslims and Christians all like to think of themselves as monotheists, uh,
Yeah.
in contrast to uh, other religions that recognize multiple gods. But then, of course, famously, there's conflict and infighting even amongst people who want to consider themselves monotheists. Famously, some Jewish and Muslim critics have said that Christians don't really count as monotheists because
Yeah.
we Christians have,
Trinity.
a Trinitarian God. But
Yeah.
a lot of modern Christians have been invested in defending the term and saying, well, even though it's Trinitarian, it still counts as monotheistic. So, yeah, it's an identity term and uh, a term for arguing and defining boundaries, and I think that's why it's been controversial, not just for religious lay people, but also in scholarship, as in the conversation we're having about the origins of the worship of Jesus, and so on. So even in that body of historical scholarship, it's remained a really controversial term. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. It has never ceased to be a controversial term, even from its very origins. Dr. Novenson, I got someone here who throw a question. I don't know if you want to tackle it right now, or if we just leave it at the end of the interview. You let me know.
Yeah, it's up to you. You're the boss, Marv. I can try it,
Okay.
but I can't
If
promise that
you
I'll know answers off
okay,
the top of my head.
let's throw Juan Bolaño. He says, "Hi, what's Dr. Novinson's opinion on the book In the Form of a God by Andrew Perryman and his other works, defending some kind of low Christology?"
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read
It's
Perriman,
been a
so
while.
I
Yeah.
don't know enough off the top of my head to give you an informed answer. There, I mean, we may get into later. It he makes uh, a point really worth discussing about Philippians 2, about whether the
Yeah.
phrase, although being in the form of God, is to say in the form of God, with a, to use an anachronism, with a capital G, that is kind of the one God, or God the Father, because I think it doesn't have a definite article in that instance, and so one can argue that it means that he had the form of a divine being, right? That he had a God form as opposed to a mortal human form. That's an exegetical question that is a fair one, needs some discussing. So yeah, off the top of my head, I can't say more than that, so apologies to Wong.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to say this. I had a couple of months ago, I had Crispin Fletcher Louis from UK. I did an interview with him about his most recent massive book on the Divine Heart Set, which is he's giving us really fresh perspectives on Philippians 2 6:11. And I asked him, "What do you think? It's something like how do you translate it? In the form of a god, or in the form of God, like alluding like the big guy, God, the God of Israel?" He said, "Well, my view is that Paul is he has the God of Israel in mind." And I said, "Well, that's his view." All right. Need to take that in consideration. All right, perfect. Let's move on to the second question, Dr. Novenson, right here. And people, as you might imagine, when we talk about monotheism in its original context, as I was saying to Dr. Novenson off camera, Jesus is like at the center. Okay, so take a look at the second question here, Dr. Novenson. In terms of how Jesus was understood to be related to the God of Israel, there have been a variety of proposals. Divine identity, which is Richard Balkan, if I'm not mistaken, revolutionary Jewish monotheism, the late Larry Hurtado, who was a colleague of Dr. Novenson, Edinburgh, Two Powers in Heaven, Alan Siegel, and also we got the Big Bang Christology. I took this from Paula Fredrickson's in this book that you edited, and also last but not least, Divine Christology more recently. So, Dr. Novenson, what's your take on this subject matter? What's your view on this?
That's a big question, because those terms, which are all important ones in the history of recent discussion, get a whole lot of different issues out on the table. So for instance, the phrase Big Bang Christology comes from Paula Fredrickson in her chapter in this book we're discussing, Monotheism and Christology in Greco-Roman Antiquity. But so she uses that phrase, which is a very it's a very vivid, very helpful one, but she actually argues against it. So she's not a proponent of Big Bang Christology, but a critic.
Okay.
So I mean, so that idea, for instance, is that everything that was going to happen in sort of the development of early Christian Christology sort of already happened virtually before we have any written sources, like the letters of Paul. So, and Fredrickson writes about this critically. It's the view she thinks, she plausibly thinks, is in the works of Larry Hurtado, for instance, also Carey Newman, David Capes, Richard Balcom. And Hurtado in particular cites Martin Hengel as saying this. He says that the most important and the biggest developments in Christology happened sort of immediately upon the resurrection appearances of Jesus, not sort of with subsequent reflection later. And Fredrickson argues, and I'm actually closer to her on this, that well, it's not the case that there's any sort of like easy, like steady development line in early Christology. Nevertheless, you know, what Paul says is not what John says, is not what Justin Martyr says, is not what the Council of Nicaea says. And there are different claims being made by different authors in different times and places. And those differences matter for our historical reconstruction of how it works. So anyway, let's see. Divine identity, Richard Balcom's notion has been really influential, really helpful, I think, for a lot of people working on early
Oh yeah.
Christology after Bauckham. What I really like about that idea of his is this the idea that understandings of God and our sources are often sort of personal and dynamic rather than
Mm-hmm.
just speculative philosophical. So his idea of identity means it's not a question of what God is, but who God is, right? God as a
Hmm.
as a personal being. I think that's a very profound point that has a lot of traction in the primary sources we're looking at. So where I disagree with
Yeah. Where do
what
where do you
with
disagree?
well, what Bauckham does with that idea basically is to say um, the identity of God is the one who creates, the one who makes all things, and
Mm-hmm.
then everything else that isn't the creator, therefore, is not God. So he really wants to get to this bright line between God and not God, creator and creature, and then he wants to argue, and this part I think has legs. He says in I mean, he wants to say, I think, in more or less all of our sources, but at any rate, in a lot of our sources, Christ is uncreated.
Hmm.
He's not a created thing. And so if you start with Bauckham's binary distinction between the creator and everything else, and if Jesus Christ is not created, then he has to be the one God because he belongs
Yeah.
on that side of the distinction and not on the other. Um, I mean, I do think some of our sources, I mean, yeah, just don't say whether Christ is created or not.
Hmm.
I mean, I think um, I think most of the ones like Paul in the Gospel of John, where a lot of early Christian that's the fodder for a lot of early Christology, either specify that he's uncreated, or like in the letters of Paul, talks about created beings, but does not include Christ in the list. So I think Paul thinks Christ is not created, um,
Hmm.
but uh, but I think Paul
That's
also is
interesting.
careful. Paul also does not straightforwardly call Christ God the way the Gospel of John does, even
Hmm.
though
Hmm.
uh, even though if I use Bauckham's idea of divine identity, then yeah, it's kind of true that for Paul, Christ is on that side of the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my complaint about that use of that distinction is that it papers over some of the details of the language of the sources in the interest of getting to a particular theological claim at the end. Um,
Hmm.
so I have some agreements and disagreements with that, but it has been really generative for a lot of people working on early Christology. So um, Hurtado's idea of uh,
Yeah.
a kind of that there's such a thing as early Jewish monotheism, and then he calls early Christology a mutation or a sort of slight
Mutation.
change or
Yeah.
twist in it. Uh, I mean, yeah, Hurtado, I should say, is before he died, was a close friend because we were colleagues in Edinburgh for a long time, and we used to argue
Okay.
about this. We argued about this in person often. Um, I mean, it's well, it's another profound and rightly influential account.
Yeah.
My objection to Hurtado, the thing that we used to argue about was
Mm-hmm.
by saying that by speaking of Christological monotheism, he was kind of wanting to say because it's monotheism, it doesn't count as pagan. He could sort of insulate it from paganism, from Greco-Roman religions. But by calling it Christological, that made it uniquely Christian. And so it wasn't Judaism. So it was his way, in my view, of kind of carving out a space between Judaism and paganism.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I mean, in my own historical work in the sources, I'm skeptical of that project because
Okay.
I think I think our earliest Christian sources are both Jewish and they are Greco-Roman. They're
Yeah.
not separate. They're not separate from either of those. They just are Jewish Roman sources. And so for that's the quarrel I had with Hurtado was what work is being done by kind of quarantining or separating early Christology from what could be called Jewish or what could be called pagan. Yeah.
Okay.
The he died a number of years ago, and so this
Yeah.
has been less discussed recently. But Alan Siegel's book on Two Powers in Heaven is an incredible book. I think
Oh yeah.
comes at it
I
from a
agree.
very different angle, right? Because he starts with that phrase "Two Powers in Heaven" is not that's not Alan Siegel's innovation. That's a quote from rabbinic literature, and so Siegel's trying to understand what the rabbinic sources are talking about when they use the phrase two powers in heaven, which is an idea they attribute to some sectarians. And Siegel kind of ingeniously linked up what these late ancient Jewish sources were seeing with the actual development of ideas in early Christianity and in Gnosticism as well. An idea that there's some kind of plurality within God, or at least two beings in the divine throne room, and then debates about whether those are complementary to each other, like the Father and the Son, or whether they're opposed to each other, like in a kind of Manichaean system where you have equal and opposite divine powers. So Siegel's book is really, it's a brilliant look at how Christianity and also Gnosticism looked to rabbinic Jews in late antiquity, that's not the way that New Testament scholars usually get into this question, but it's one of the most productive discussions recently, in my view.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Novenson, I am more familiar with Siegel's work because of my mentor, the late Michael Heiser. Because, Heiser used to say, like, okay, first century Judaism, there is a variety. There is no one monolithic Judaism. We have a variety of strands, okay, in Judaism. So, but it was common to think of two powers in heaven, and to that point in history, they were kind of speculating who is the second power. Some would say, well, it's Abraham. Some others would say, well, it's Adam. Some even would say, okay, it's Moses or Yahoel or whatever. And Heiser used to say, well, with the rise of the Jesus movement, the Christians, they go like, okay, everybody pay attention. We already know who is the second power, is Jesus of Nazareth. And you just crucified him. So that's my basic understanding. And then Heiser used to say, quoting from Siegel's, that I think it was the late 2nd century, you can correct me on that, but it was normative in Judaism to think of that way. It was a doctrine, if we can use that word. But then with the rise of rabbinic Judaism, they were declaring this as a heresy, because Christians were just taking advantage of this point of view. So that was the way I came to know about Siegel's work, how this was playing in all that. Of course, Heiser would say, well, yeah, he is the second power. He even quotes, what's the passage? I'm not good at quoting passages, but it's the scene where Jesus is on trial, and he said, well, you will see the Son of Man coming with the clouds, and he will sit at the right hand of the power. Yeah. And he will say, well, there you have it, power, second power. So, and he will connect it back with the Son of Man in Daniel 7. So my personal view, Dr. Novenson, is that this is complex. It's complex. It's very difficult, at least from the way I see it as a layman. there is a lot of complexities when it comes to Christological views.
Hmm.
I have no problem when people say, scholars say, well, there's no one univocality when it comes to Christological views in the Gospels. Paul, Peter, they're just trying to wrap their head around on this thing about Jesus, how he relates to the big guy, which is the God of Israel. So that would be my layman attempt to understand what
Hmm.
we got in the Gospels and Paul. And yeah, and I will go. I won't go further than that.
No, that's
Yeah.
a very good yeah, that's a very good account. I wouldn't say that the two powers idea was a doctrine prior to the rabbis, but
Okay.
uh so um the key thing I think is it's an idea that's available and that's already there in scripture. I mean, certainly in Daniel 7, and then because
Hmm.
you have the Ancient of Days, and then you have the Son of Man who's given
Yes.
all the authority by the Ancient of Days.
Exactly.
Um, and Daniel Boyarin's argued that the vision of Daniel
Oh
7
yeah.
has like ancient roots, to the idea in uh, like early layers of the Hebrew Bible where there's El or Elyon, the high
Hmm.
god, and then there's a sort of younger warrior god,
Yeah.
and eventually it's uh, you know Adonai, the God of Israel. Sort of all the divine names are sort of piled up by some of our Hebrew Bible sources,
Yeah.
but uh, I mean, I think Boyarin's and a lot of people have written about this, but I think he's right that there's way back ways of thinking about both sort of a high father god and then a younger warrior god, like a son, uh, and so the idea is available, uh, and that's why I think that the two powers idea sort of makes some obvious sense. But I think Siegel is right. By the time you get a lot of discussion of it in rabbinic literature, right, rabbis are aware of Christians and vice versa, and there's a very understandable rabbinic Jewish desire to kind of like draw the
Sure.
boundary between what the Christians say and then what sort of classically Orthodox in the rabbinic sense, will allow, uh, as sort of true of God. So,
Yeah. Now, just before moving to the third question, Dr. Novenson, uh, and everybody out there, you already know my views on this. I mean, um, I like the way John J. Collins put it. I mean, I consider myself. I'm not a scholar. Dr. Novenson, he is a legitimate scholar. Uh, but I am what Dr. John J. Collins calls the educated non-specialist. That's what I consider myself to be. So I have invested a lot of reading. That's why I said this is a topic really close to my heart because it's related to Jesus. I mean,
mm,
which Bud Ehrman says he's probably the most influential figure here in the West, and why not? So, as you know, I don't hold to the Trinity. Like I'm not in that bucket. Um, I'm not a Unitarian or whatever you call it. No, but for me to be, and I don't know what do you think about this, Dr. Nelson, but from a historical perspective, the Trinity it's a much later development, innovation kind
mm,
of thing. I was the other day talking with Gabriele Boccaccini, and I said we were talking about Paul, dear loving Paul, and I said, well, what do you think about the Christ? Because we were touching on the Christological stuff, and I asked him, what do you think about the Trinity? Do you think it's legitimate to say the Bible talks about the Trinity like very concretely, and he said, "Well, you know, uh, n- not in the historical way. No, we don't have any specific passage, but people later, like in the Church Fathers era, they are reading the text and they are drawing those ideas from the text." I mean, the pieces are scattered all throughout the scripture, and they are building this philosophical framework on top of that. And I said, well, that's fair. Why not? I mean,
Hmm.
it makes sense. But that's why I consider this topic very, very important to understand how the first followers regarded and viewed Jesus in
Hmm.
relation to the God of Israel. So let's move on
Hmm.
to the third question, Dr. Novenson, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So this has to do with passages. So what biblical passages are kind of a slam dunk? Sorry about that. Counter argument to the classical meaning of monotheism, namely that there is only one God, and the others just don't exist.
Yeah. That's a good, very stark way to put it. I mean, I think that is the sort of what you have there in quotes, I think is basically what the word monotheism suggests to most English speakers.
Yeah.
Right? There's only one God, and so there's nothing else that exists that could be called a god. And anything that people call gods that isn't the one God, they're wrong about that. It must be something else. So, I mean, the slam dunk text to put in contrast to that, I mean, there's lots of biblical texts that talk about gods, Elohim or Theoi, plural,
Yeah.
and often very expressly putting God with a capital G, the God of Israel in a lot of Hebrew Bible texts, or God the Father of Jesus in New Testament texts, actually putting that deity directly into sort of position in relation to other gods. I mean, the really classic example is Psalm 95.
Mm-hmm.
Right, a text a lot of people know that says is the Lord is the great God, the great King over all the gods, which is talking about that one God, but precisely by comparing him to other gods. So he's the king over others. Um, a New Testament example that's a classic text in these monotheism and Christology discussions is 1 Corinthians 8. People often think of the verse in verse 6 when Paul says, "For us there is one God, the Father." But in the previous verse, right, he says, "Inasmuch as there are many gods and many lords, nevertheless for us there is one God, namely the Father, and one Lord, namely Jesus Christ." So, right, both the psalmist and Paul are comfortable talking about gods plural, and yet the one God, the Father, they want to insist is higher and older than all of those. Now, people who insist on using the term monotheism, like my late friend Larry Hurtado, would say, well, that still counts as monotheism. It's just a kind of inclusive monotheism that
Yeah.
talks about these other things as ontologically lower ranks than God. And that's a fair point. But but then my objection would always be, but if the psalmist is comfortable calling them gods and Paul is comfortable calling them gods, then why are we not comfortable calling them gods, right? So I think that's the trick is monotheism. The word sounds like it suggests there's literally no other being that could be called a god, and yet a lot of biblical texts do call other beings gods. And so how do you square that word with those biblical texts? Some people would just do away with the word because, of course, until Henry Moore in the 17th century, we didn't have the word. So,
Yeah.
Jews and Christians got along just fine with it for many, many centuries. But as we discussed in relation to the first question, I mean, the word has become so important as an identity
Mm-hmm.
term for so many people, Jews and Christians and Muslims, that a lot of people, including a lot of scholars, just are not willing to let the word go. And so then what they have to do is define it, massage it in such a way that they can make sense of
Yeah.
these biblical texts that talk about multiple gods. So that's the trick.
Now, this would be my personal question to you on this specific matter. What about the famous the Shema? The Lord is one. Um, he, so, I mean, I've been in discussions regarding this subject matter, and that most of the times, Dr. Novenson, it always most likely will come up in the discussion, like, hey, what about this passage? Hear Israel, the Lord is one. There you have it.
Yeah.
No more. or typically they will go like, hey, just go and check Isaiah. Okay, those gods are just mere idols, stones, wooden. So don't put too stuck on that. So just keep moving, citizens. There's nothing else to see here. So, I mean, and then I would say, okay, well, have you checked Psalm 82? How about that?
Yeah.
How about and the reason I'm asking this to you is because, I mean, the typical atheist who wants to just clown around and just come and destroy someone's faith, they will typically and use this kind of passages just to point out that the Bible is polytheistic and everything. So I think if we are honest enough and we are very diligent in the scripture, I mean, it's quite obvious. It's right there. I mean, it's just a matter to be intellectual honest. Just read it for yourself and be aware of that. For these people, I mean, ancient people like Sumerians, Egyptians, Mesopotamian, whatever. I mean, they really think this is real for them. The gods are real. They are real. Like it's a what do you call it? It's a saturated God world. I mean, the gods are in every single day of their lives. I mean, it's just right there. So, I understand there's a lot of traditions involved in this. So, I have no issues if someone comes up and say, well, okay, but the Bible is speaking about the gods and they're real. Okay, fine. I'm good. Let's do it. But there are people who still they have this as some issue to deal with. So we need to knock it off and move on. Okay, let's move on to the question that has to do with Paul. Okay, this is a good one. So, Dr. Novenson, in your view, what's Paul's understanding of Jesus? Does Paul think of him as the incarnate God of Israel or something else?
I think that for Paul, above all, Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, that he calls him more than he calls him anything else. And the particular kind of Messiah he is something uniquely related to God the Father. I mean, a really telling phrase, I think, in Paul is that Christ is the image, that is the visible icon that you can see of God who's invisible. So he's the image of the invisible God. Now, I would say that's not the same as what the Gospel of John says, that you use the phrase incarnation, which we get from the Gospel of John, because it uses the word sarx, or flesh. The Logos became flesh, and incarnation is built on that root. So I find it confusing to use the term incarnation for Paul, because he doesn't say, like John does, that there is this thing, the Logos, that became flesh. That's what I understand by incarnation. So I don't use that phrase for Paul because I think it's a bit confusing, unless I were sort of trying to harmonize all the different New Testament ways of speaking. But I would say for Paul, Jesus is the Son of God, the Messiah, who's also the image of God, but not the incarnation of God, because that's not how Paul puts it. That's how John puts it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So Christ is the unique Son of God. Well, he's unique until the resurrection, when Paul says all the resurrected become his brothers. He's the firstborn of all the people who become sons of God or children of God. But Christ alone is this, as the Messiah, hidden away with God before his human life. He is the one image or representation of God, the Father, who's invisible. That's how I would put it. I wouldn't. I prefer not to just assimilate Paul to John's idiom, at least for purposes of kind of historical reading.
No, I mean, thank you for the correction, because you're the first you're the first guy, scholar, that I hear like not conflating, not taking language from another author and imposing that language on Paul. I mean, that's fair. I mean, because I mean, we don't find the incarnation word in Pauline letters, whether we're calling about the 7 authentic letters, Paul. I personally, Dr. Novenson, I personally think it's I don't know. I mean, I understand we got this phenomena. What do you call it? Pseudonymity.
Yeah.
I have no issues with that. I don't know how you scholars arrive, and I don't want to put you in the same bucket. I don't know what's your view on that, but I don't know how you arrived to that conclusion, because I understand that's the consensus that Paul didn't write all of the 13 letters. So just getting back to what you just said, so we need to be very careful not imposing language on, in this case, Paul. We need to be very careful just to go with the same concepts and rhetoric that he's using, because that's like respecting Paul's original message, right? Like just go with whatever he has put right there in his writings. So I was reading the other day. I don't know if you know this guy, Travis Niles. He published with Morse Siebeck. I think it was a monograph. Oh, I'm gonna have to show it to you very quick.
Okay.
And this is a monograph, and it's called "The Image of the Invisible God." Yeah, and I think I have it right here. Yeah, let me share the screen with you so you can see it. And I was just reading last night about in this book, and I found some nuggets, very interesting nuggets right there. Let me just go ahead, and it's an open access, by the way. People, go ahead and take advantage of that.
Yeah,
it's open access. Yeah. So
that's
it's
good.
it's an exegetical study of Colossians 1:15 through 20. So basically, what he's saying, Dr. Novenson, is that we need to be very careful just to understand what Paul meant by the image of the invisible God. That's one thing. And the other thing he pointed out is that it's like imperative for us as a readers, whether scholars or not, to go and find that literature, whether philosophical literature or whatever, that was current in Paul's day, because most likely Paul was drawing from the, what do you call it, the stock languages regarding the gods, divine images, the image, icon, and everything, so we can have a better comprehension, understanding what he was trying to convey when he says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, which is kind of for you as a scholar, this is kind of axiomatic, right? Second nature. But he's drawing from Seneca, Plutarch, Plato, Philo, of course. But yeah, the thing is this: he's not proposing. I don't know if I should spill the beans here. I'm gonna spoil a little bit, but should I or shouldn't I? Okay, I'm gonna put it this way. Okay, he might give you a surprise. Okay, he has some surprises right there for you. I'm not gonna say any further because I don't want to spoil the whole thing. And his writing is awesome. I just enjoyed it. So go ahead, take advantage. It's an open access. Grab it and read through it, and let us know what you think about that. And also for you, Dr. Novenson, when you have sometimes in your schedule.
That's
So
great.
let's move on to the let's move on to the I think it's the last question. If I'm not, yeah, it's the last question. So, uh, Dr. Novenson, last but not least, what other terms have been offered to describe, to better describe this belief in the existence of many gods in antiquity? And finally, what literature would you recommend for anyone who wants to go deeper?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean the term most people know as a contrast term to monotheism is polytheism, which literally means
Yeah.
many gods, right? Uh, that term itself just suggests plurality, but doesn't organize the gods at all. So a couple of other very old terms that are still useful are, there's a term called henotheism,
Yeah.
which is the same root theism, that is gods, but hen in Greek means one, the number one. And so the word henotheism is often used to mean, although there may be multiple gods, there's one over all.
Mhm.
Kind of like Psalm 95, right? The Lord is the great God, the great King over all the gods. That's what people who've used that term historically have meant by henotheism. Multiple gods, but with one who's over all of them.
Yeah.
There's a related term, but it means something different, that's often called monolatry.
Mhm.
So latreia, as in idolatry, means worship. And so monolatry means whatever gods may exist. Monolatry means worshiping only the one, not multiple. And that arguably is like what Paul means when he says, although there are many gods and many lords, nevertheless, for us, there is one God. That is, we only show allegiance to the one. Arguably,
Yeah.
that is also the big idea behind the Shema in Deuteronomy. Is there's the gods of all the nations of Canaan, but for Israel, there's the one God. So you love that God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. So monolatry means worshiping the only one. Henotheism means there may be multiple, but one is exalted over all. Those are useful terms because they make finer distinctions than just monotheism versus polytheism, right? I know of two very recent terms that some scholars have introduced that are useful.
Okay.
There's a Greek classicist in Princeton called Angelos Kaniotis, uses this term megatheism.
Oh yeah.
And megatheism, mega means great. Megatheism is a term he uses in the context of religious competition in the early Roman Empire. And he says, so
Mhm.
megatheism means the insistence that this God is greater, is superior, is more worthy of worship and honor and cult than whatever other gods they may be. So it's a kind of competitive term. And Paula Fredrickson has used that in relation to
Exactly.
some early Christian texts, which is really helpful. Um,
Yeah.
uh, Emma Wasserman uses a term called, what does she say? Monarchical polytheism. So polytheism, many gods, but there's a hierarchy there with a divine king at the top. Um, and that's another sort of, you know, finely tuned way of holding these things together. Talk about multiple deities, but insisting on the supremacy of God the Father and Christ the Son. So I think those are useful terms. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I heard Paula Fredrickson using that term megatheism because she's one of the strong and strong voices arguing against the monotheism is not the best term to capture the religious phenomena in antiquity. So Dr. Novenson, I don't know if you are looking at my screen right now,
Yeah, yeah.
but people, this is the Edinburgh Studies in Religion and Antiquity series editors, of course, Dr. Novenson, James Rives. I hope I'm saying that right. I don't want to be butchering his last name.
I don't know. It's
and
Reeves,
and
James
Paula.
Reeves. Yeah.
Oh, James Reeves. Thank you so much. And Paula, the one and only Paula Fredrickson. Uh, and here are some of the books. Look at that: Christian Beginnings, Stanley Towers, The Apocalypse of the Birds, The Origins of Corinthian Christ Group, Contested Cures, and Divination and Philosophy in the Letters of Paul. This is interesting. I like this one.
It's a good
And they
book.
are very affordable. Of course, Dr. Novenson, he's super biased right now. But yeah, go ahead and grab those book. I mean, this is high. This is top notch scholarship. Okay, so final comments right now here. Again, this interview doesn't do justice to the whole topic, but people, with Dr. Novenson tackling our questions here, just to give you like an overview, uh, what exactly they are trying to do by, reevaluating the term monotheism. I understand this is also, as he said, that it has a history where it was used to, what do you call it? To propel this idea that only the God of Israel is the big guy. Uh, yeah, I mean, you can think that. I really think of God that way. Like he's the big boss. But from the text, I try to be as honest as possible that ancient people, they are acknowledging the existence of the other gods. Dr. Novenson, before I let you go, I need to ask you this. This is a personal question to you. When Paul talks about the principality, rulers, and powers and whatnot, do you think Paul has? I mean, he is thinking of the gods, but the only thing that has changed is the language.
Hmm.
But the principality, he is referring to the powers over the nations. Do you think that's a fair interpretation point of view, or am I missing something in there?
Yes. So that is my view. Here I was persuaded by, and I follow Emma Wasserman's reading of this, that in 1 Corinthians 8, Paul is willing to use the word gods, theoi, plural, but usually
Yeah,
he doesn't. But he does use a number of other phrases, like the archons, the principalities or rulers, and the dunamis or powers,
yeah,
and still others. I mean, in Galatians he talks about the stoicheia or the elements. So he uses a lot of terms
yeah,
for superhuman beings, but he doesn't call them usually theoi, gods.
mm,
But Wasserman argued these are the gods of Gentile nations, but Paul is classifying them in his own system by calling them powers and rulers and elements and so on, because usually he's doing that to show the hierarchy, to show that for him, God the Father is over all,
yeah,
and Christ is right a second power. Christ is at the right hand of the Father, and none of these other powers, superhuman divine beings, can
yeah,
compete with the power of God the Father and Christ the Son. But nevertheless, they are powers, that is, divine beings.
yeah,
And, um, in according to a lot of Jewish myth, going back to Genesis, there are 70 nations of the whole world. And
yeah,
for later Jewish tradition, there's 70 angels over the 70
yeah,
nations of the world. Uh, which is a kind of ancient Jewish way of saying what Gentile gods are. They're angels over the nations, and I think that's really close to Paul's view, but that he
okay.
uses these other terms like powers, principalities, elements, and so on. Yeah. So maybe you and I agree. more or less on that issue. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I just sign me up with whatever you think of that. Okay, I just want to say this as a personal last comment here. You know, when it comes to the relationship between Jesus and the God of Israel, the big guy, I this is my what do you call it? My I don't know what word to use here. Okay, I am willingly to leave something in the mystery that we won't know until the end comes. By the way, this is a wink to Dr. Novenson's latest book, Paul in the in Judaism, the end of history. But I'm willing to reserve. I mean, I'm willing to deal with mystery. Okay, okay. I'm putting my cards on the table, Dr. Novenson. I mean, I enjoy what the Bible, what Paul, the first disciples, the Gospel, John, whatever, are saying about Jesus. And we have a variety of portrayals about Jesus, right? Fine, good, fantastic. But I'm willing to read all of that one, two, three. Doesn't matter how many times I will do it, probably until I go to the grave. But I'm willing to leave mystery, and I am willing to understand and to go with this thought that it will be only until we meet God face to face, like the big day we're gonna be looking at Jesus and God face to face. And many, because I don't know Dr. Novenson, but because I don't want to speak on his part, but me personally, I got a ton of questions to ask God. Like, in the first place, what the heck happened in the eating? Please. I have a lot of questions. So I'm willing to put up with mystery. I mean, as far as I can, because I believe in God. I'm not afraid to say it. I have no issues with that. But I'm willing to deal with mystery when it comes to Jesus. And Paul did his best to understand the relationship between these two guys, father and son. Perfect. The disciples did the best to understand it. The church fathers also. We here in the 21st century, we're still wrestling with scripture to how the heck we're going to wrap our heads around this text. Okay, and we got the scholars just like Dr. Novenson. They are writing stuff just to give us more windows into the ancient world, how they thought about this stuff, why they wrote whatever they did in order to understand the concept of God, the divinity, monotheism, God, angels, powers, everything. So long story short, to say mystery is something that I have, just it's one option right there. Okay, so Dr. Novenson, final comments, please let us know.
What you just said is a good place to end, maybe. I mean, I think if you want to think about these texts theologically, as I myself do too, then I think a capacity for mystery is a very important tool. I mean, I often think that's how, if you want to say something positive or constructive about the relation between the Father and the Son or something like that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we know from the history of theology it's tremendously complicated, but
yeah,
that's precisely why Paul doesn't sound exactly like John, doesn't sound exactly like Mark, etc. Right? That it's not as if you just harmonize them all, then you have a sort of a perfect and entire summary of the truth about everything. I think they're all partial, and that's why I think, maybe not only for historical purposes but also for theological thinking, it's useful to stop and think, now why does Paul say it this way, which is different from how John says it, and to try to wrap our minds around those particular details is a worthwhile task, I think. So maybe again you and I agree. So.
Okay. everybody. So Dr. Novenson, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming to the show. I hope this is not the last time. Remember, this is a platform for scholars, because in this platform we can agree and disagree, and we're still friends at the end of the day. And I can go and invite you to take a coffee. I don't know if you like coffee or tea, because you're in UK. I don't know.
That's right.
So thank you so much. And everyone, just to remind you about our future interviews, as I was saying to Dr. Novenson, Dr. Helen Bunch is coming to the show to talk about the first biography of Jesus. Magnificent book, because she's tackling the genre matter thing. We need to understand what kind of genre the Gospels are and why that matters. Also, Robin Faith Walsh is coming to the show on June to talk about, New Testament origins, the New Testament literature origins in its Greco-Roman literary culture. Mouthful, I know. And last but not least, the great Jim Vanderkam is coming to the show. We're just a couple days away from that. He's coming to talk about the Book of Jubilees and the 2 volumes. Massive. That's all I can say. Massive. Two volumes there in Hermenia series. So please keep those interviews just right on your schedule. And if you got questions, please come to the interview so we can throw it right here to the author himself, and we can put it right there. Dr. Novenson, once again, thank you so much for your time, people. Until the next time, and remember, religion is important, but critically analyzing it, that is even more important. Until the next time, bye now.